All right, all right. Let's get started. Maybe with a quick elevator pitch, like everyone just real quick what they are doing. Markus, do you want to start?
Sure. Markus, founder of Propellerheads. We've been solving for quite a while on CowSwap and other auctions, and recently sort of pivoted towards building infrastructure for solvers, market makers, searchers, making it easy to use liquidity. And we're also working on a dark solver on Suave.
Dark pool, dark solver now, okay.
More specific.
Hey, I'm Peter from Reservoir. Most notably, we have built Relay, which is an intent-based bridge, fast bridge, and we, like many others, operate a solver on our own bridge.
Katia from Bebop. We do DEX aggregation within the context of this conversation. A big part of it is our on-chain RFQ, so bringing off-chain liquidity and quality of execution on-chain.
Connor, the co-founder of Enso. We built an intent engine that enables application developers to build on-chain very easily and quickly. We also run solvers on top of our own infrastructure.
And I'm Philipp. I'm from LiFi. We have been aggregating all kinds of liquidity sources, all the DEX aggregators and bridges. So you have one API for all DeFi liquidity being used by 15 of the 20 largest wallets in the space, from Robinhood to MetaMask, and kind of selling this to any kind of debt. So let's get it started. Maybe let's start with Katia. I'm wondering, how do you differentiate between what a market maker is and what a solver is, and how would you describe today's relation between those two?
I love it how a lot of those panels are about like semantic and philosophical differences and meanings of words. What is an intent and what is a solver? Okay, I'll start with what a market maker is. A market maker is a very established role in various markets, including the financial markets, and it's an actor that creates their own pricing and gets paid for market risk, right? And so that's what market makers are. And so within, anyway, right? Within DeFi, within CeFi, within TradFi, wherever. I think the word solvers, was it invented by CowSwap? I suppose maybe it was. And that was about on-chain routing, right? That's an optimization problem. Yeah, so it is indeed the case that market makers would come and fill the orders that solvers also could fill, but solvers are dependent on the state of the chain. A solver failing a transaction, would mean that a solver just couldn't simulate it on chain because the pools have moved away. A maker always has the choice to fill and not fill the transaction. And for example, they might choose to fill a transaction at their loss if they want to increase their market share, right? It's an entirely different type of decision because they have their own capital. Anyway, I like out of all those words in the context of intent-based trading, I like the word filler. I actually think Uni did a very good job at using that word because ultimately someone comes and fills the order. But market makers and solvers are not the same. Yes.
We could argue that a solver takes much greater risk than a market maker does.
Sorry, say it again.
So a solver...
market maker takes more market risk.
Yeah.
A solver invests their time in optimizing the pathing and the routing and all that sort of stuff. And of course, there's some commercial part in that involved. But I'd say probably much easier for market maker to get wrecked than for a solver to get wrecked.
Interesting. I would argue that could potentially change with resource locks, where essentially solver have to take care of filling bridging orders for long tail assets, for example. This could be something where that changes a little bit. As solvers solve more complex transactions with cross-chain zapping, for example, there's more room for failure and finality risk in general. So I just from a bird view perspective, that's something I was thinking about. But yeah.
Do you not see that market makers will handle the cross-chain part, and then solvers will just take the, let's say, USDC in the second chain and then manipulate that to go into like DeFi positions or base tokens? So the middle part is like managed by somebody else completely.
Could be. My next question would have been, what is today's relationships between solvers, fillers, and market makers? I think, Peter, you have some.
Well, just to add, yeah, if you think of solvers as only, none of their own inventory, they're just pathfinding, and then market makers are kind of taking risk across assets. I think there's kind of like also a third middle ground, which is effectively what we do. Where, we have inventory. We're mostly focused on cross-chain orders, but we're not pricing things. We're like, because between ETH on Ethereum and ETH on Base, and so it's all mixed together. Like I don't know if there's like a specific word for that one, and also increasingly people just use Solver to kind of cover everything as this magical actor that's going to
the hand of God.
Exactly. So yeah, it's just like another category, I think, if we're getting into like the granular pieces.
I agree. Okay, maybe we can stay right there. As you are operating as a solver and as a bridge, but what do you see as your greatest challenge these days when it comes to solving? And then I would love to hear Markus on that, who has been building very sophisticated solver systems as well, and operates in the solver market in general, and just released a nice product in there as well, where you can talk about that. But Peter, what is your greatest challenge as like currently operating as a solver?
As a solver with inventory, the biggest challenge is having enough money and having that money in all the right places at the right time. And so, yeah, it's one easy solve is to just throw more money at it. But otherwise, it becomes a challenge around predicting where demand is going to be, understanding kind of the speed at which you can move it. There's also within the speed that you can move it around like a price trade-off. So, you can use canonical roll-up bridges for free effectively, kind of or tap into other bridges to rebalance. But yeah, I think that is the biggest challenge. It's like not that hard to go and kind of tap into kind of a lot of the on-chain, use something like LiFi to understand kind of the long tail pieces on either chain, and maybe that's not as competitive as like a true market maker, although market makers probably will tend to stick to the major assets. And so, yeah, long-winded way of saying just more money in the right places, and that becomes increasingly hard with more chains.
You have your own inventory. Would you consider partnering up with someone like Arrakis or like Wintermute to source liquidity from these players?
That is such a contentious 2 words in one sentence. Like Arrakis or Wintermute. I love it.
I didn't mean it that way.
Patrick loves spice. He's very happy right now.
Yes. Yeah, I think it becomes an interesting challenge of where the order flow is coming from, and yeah, whether you're sharing that with kind of other solvers or filling it yourself. But yeah, when you say Arrakis, this is kind of like the vaults of kind of stable pairs, right? Can you tap into that? But yeah, whatever's available, and trading it off between on-chain and off-chain, whatever's the best route.
Markus, what do you see as additional challenges for solvers? What have you been experiencing? I know you have been very early in that, an early cow solver. Maybe you can give a bit of a background, where you're coming from, what you're doing now, and.
Very happy to. But I can't resist jumping on the semantics question as well for 1 minute. Because I think like semantics is useful to the extent that it helps you meaningfully computationally reduce observed phenomena. And I think we actually have very good terms. And we're almost there. I think we have very good terms. And we have most of the facts on set so far, which is that there are different tasks, and they actually separate very cleanly between the teams. Like, there are solver teams, and there is hardly any solver team that wants to take on inventory risk or that wants to take on pricing risk. They don't. Solver teams focus on routing complexity. So they're like composability wizards, right? They focus on managing the composability of atomically accessible liquidity. I think it's very clean, and there's almost no solver leaving that group. And then market makers focus on risk management and utility and inventory management. And then fillers focus mainly on inventory management. Right? There is no market risk. There's not much composability. It's mainly inventory management. I think these are very nice terms, filling, solving, market making. Just my 2 cents. Now to your question. What is the complexity on solver side? I think underappreciated is that it is very hard to make use of the composability in DeFi. Yes, much of DeFi's liquidity is permissionlessly accessible. Doesn't mean that it is easy to access, especially in the time constraints that solvers have. Right? You need to know all the state that you need to compute a certain route, and then you need to be able to simulate over that fast enough so that you can explore the tree of possible solutions far enough so that you can come up with a good solution. And then actually settle that on chain, and then you can't just deploy any sort of contract. You also have to consider security in your router and in your adapters against these DEXs, and you can very easily make a mistake there. So there's at least these 3 components: indexing, simulation, and execution. And we found those to be very effortful, and months and months of effort, perhaps for just a single protocol. We went through that phase and did a lot of that work, and then decided a few months ago that we will now open source all of that. And that's what Tycho is. We launched it last week. So the indexing, simulation, and execution contracts, we all open source them against all the DEX liquidity that there is. Yeah.
Interesting. On which chains are you on with Tycho right now, and how fast do you see it expanding in that multi-chain environment we're in?
So it's built completely chain abstracted, so it's not even EVM, it's not VM specific, and we already have a road to be on Solana and the Cosmos ecosystem. But today we are on mainnet. We have a test deployment on Arbitrum, and we will also be on Unichain very soon. But yeah, we know that it is not complex with this architecture to scale to other chains. There are chain-specific adaptations we have to do specifically around block times.
Connor, Markus mentioned that zapping, like that, making use of composability is very tough. I know that Enso has been running a solver in the past, and we have been collaborating, especially with LiFi and Enso, on multi-chain zapping. So, what are your 2 cents nowadays on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit context. Like Enso, we focus on like DeFi aggregation, not purely just swaps, right? We see this as like one part of the intent ecosystem. For us, intents are a lot more broad, i.e. you can build applications using intents. They could be using DeFi, swaps, NFTs, and so forth. In terms of the complexity of integrating DeFi, it's more, each individual protocol is very, very different. Like similar to the DEXs, but especially inside of DeFi. So now you've got to account for liquidation ratios, borrowing. You've also got the other side of APY and metadata information for anyone that wants to use Enso. You also need to give that, so then they can also leverage all this underlying DeFi parts. Where it gets a little bit more complex is certain DeFi paths require like 9 hops to be able to get there. So let's say you're swapping, you'll go ETH into USDC. USDC might be broken into many different hops to be able to go through different pools. So we're accounting for that swaps and those many hops for each individual DeFi action as well. So if you want to get in a beefy pool, you need an Aura pool, requires a balancer pool, requires 2, 3, 4 tokens, which could even be 8 tokens or 1, right? So that's kind of what we specialized on. Now we found our infrastructure in a flexible way that we can integrate a new DeFi protocol safely and release it within 30 minutes. The way we do this is not by building manual smart contract adapters, but by using something called Wayroll that we kind of built in collaboration with Nick Johnson that allows a contract to take any arbitrary bytes to call any other smart contract on-chain, and then all the integration is done off-chain and then simulated off-chain to then go on-chain. That way we don't have any smart contract risks of building one adapter that might get hacked. You know, somebody in the solver space had a vulnerability last week. Due to this, somebody had this a couple of months ago as well.
Interesting. Speaking of multi-chain, I'm curious. We have very different parties here. So Tycho just released on Ethereum. You're straight away thinking about Solana, Cosmos. Peter, Relay. you kind of made it an edge to be very first on any new L2, L3 launching, partnering up with rollups as a services, did an amazing job, realized that speed matters, especially when it comes to rebalancing. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? How do you think about that multi-chain environment playing out over the next years, and how do you aim to position yourselves?
I think one of the reasons is so that we don't have to compete with these guys, all three of them, on the major chains, and it's just like a different kind of use case around, there's almost like aggregation of dexes. Like that's typically what solvers are doing. They're aggregating many dexes and kind of pathfinding, and it's focusing energy on aggregation of chains instead, and kind of how you can quickly move to new chains where there's opportunities. I mean, I'm a little biased. I do think the expansion is happening. It's accelerating. It's interesting to see things like ASS, and will that kind of like push back a little bit where maybe you don't need your own chain, and you can kind of stay on a bigger chain, or maybe you'll just start to see that the economics of more chains doesn't make sense. But yeah, I think it'll grow, and I think you will see these specialties, right? Like when you're on a small chain, you don't need kind of really specialty. There might be one DEX or no DEX, and so like specializing is much more about how you've structured your infrastructure to kind of deploy to those chains and deal with free RPCs, because there's literally no other option. And so, I almost see it as like two different categories. And for us, it's kind of where we focused.
Interesting. How is Bebop looking at the multi-chain environment? I mean, you're a spin out of Wintermute. Wintermute certainly, I know that speaking to larger market makers and so on, like no asset below 500 million market cap is essentially relevant, at least on a hedge fund level. Where do you start? Is there a framework for you to decide this is an L2 we want to engage with or not? How do you think about expanding in that multi-chain environment?
There is a framework, but I think ultimately going to new chains, especially when so many of them are coming, is always, in a way, a bit of a gamble. And I think, we work closely with our partners, with the solvers, with market makers, and so, if we make that gamble, we kind of need to bring someone with us to make that gamble. Sometimes it's worthwhile. Sometimes it's worthwhile for a period of time, and then it's not. But generally, I think we're in a bull market. This is the time to take the gambles. So we definitely do expect to go certainly to a good number of EVM compatible chains. There's definitely many names here in town, very loud, that we all know, as well as many names that I have heard for the first time this week, but we would consider going there too. And then in terms of the coins that you mentioned, yes, of course, market makers would tend to trade larger coins in general. However, any new chain, the main focus or the main kind of liquidity problem they want to solve, of course, maybe for their own token, but also it would still be for stables and ETH. That does not exclude market makers. So that's not really a consideration there.
To which extent does Wintermute's and Bebop's framework for chain expansion differ? Is it one-on-one the same?
No, it's not the same at all. I have 7 and soon 9 market makers on the platform, as well as probably 7, 8 something around those along those lines. Number of solvers. So we do have chains where Wintermute's not present at all. Most of the chains that I'm going to in the next few months, I don't expect Wintermute to be there at all. I'd love them to be, but I need to also be realistic about it.
See, as an intent network, Enso has been pivoting from being a solver to being a whole network. How do you think about multi-chain? Is your strategy more along the lines of like market makers go where the demand is today, or more along the lines of relay, where is it going to be tomorrow, and be fast and early there?
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to give a shout out to Bebop. They go like to all the new chains very, very quickly. I think they're one of the first intent networks to go there, so fair play. In terms of our strategy, we only launch on new chains if we have pre-existing customers or new customers that request it. So we don't release anything now up until somebody's asked us for this. That kind of ensures that we don't, one, waste resources, two, waste money, and we don't ship something that we need to maintain that nobody uses. We made that mistake before. We launched on, I'll name it, Linea. We launched there, and we got no traction. And now we need to maintain that, and the question is, do we get rid of this? We're going to launch on, a new chain that's launching in the next maybe Q5. That's what they're calling it now. And that's purely based upon people asking us for this. So we need to have minimum 4 customers to even scope and then also deploy. That's how we kind of do this. We will not enter into the whole multi-chain holding our own inventory aspect. I think there's better people to do this than us. And 2, we don't really have the skill set right now to be able to do that. And the risk level of managing inventory in comparison to aggregating on-chain and making it easy to interact on-chain is a whole different ballgame.
I find it very interesting. Yeah, it's a valuable attitude to go by customer demand. Very few protocols in the space doing that. At LiFi, we do the same. We just go by what our enterprise clients are demanding. Unfortunately, one of our clients is Jumper.exchange, our own B2C interface, and for them expansion is very important. But apart from that, if Jumper wouldn't be our client and so aggressive in expansion, essentially we would just go by customer demand, and then I think that is a very healthy attitude. When it comes to intent networks, I'm wondering, Peter, Markus here, when it comes to solving for intent networks, how do you think about other intent networks? I know that Relay, like you mostly create your own demand right now, right? How do you think about engaging in existing intent networks like Enso, UniX, 1inch Fusion, Anoma, and others? Do you aim to engage in those networks too?
I think there's a couple of levels for us. There's the intent network, like the settlement for how kind of a filler or a solver kind of settles the user's order, and then there's kind of this other layer of liquidity for solvers or fillers, market makers. Sorry, no such thing as liquidity for solvers. And so we're kind of thinking about both of those problems, both like how do you settle efficiently, but also how do you provide liquidity for fillers. And I think almost that second piece is more interesting. And so, for example, Relay's settlement is like very much focused on like hyper efficiency, which makes it really good for small amounts, but not that good for really large amounts. And so we could build alternative settlement mechanisms. But actually, we think we'll probably just partner with others that are kind of designing kind of different solutions on the trade-off spectrum for larger amounts or for kind of the major chains. Like that's another design thing for us of like, how do you have something that can work on the very long tail chains and not everyone needs to watch every chain and pay attention to it. So yeah, I think the kind of settlement layer and intent network layer is going to be kind of very competitive, and yeah, we're going to see lots of them, and they're going to like each optimize for different kind of trade-offs, and it's going to be impossible for one to kind of win everything, and especially if you're interacting with users in the same way that Uniswap had to kind of do Uniswap X out of necessity because otherwise they just have the worst prices. I think it'll be kind of anyone who operates a front end almost is going to have to route users over many intent networks, maybe even competitive ones if they want users to keep coming back to them, because that's kind of the expectation.
Do you envision them plugging into many different intent networks themselves, or they plug into one source that then aggregates all these different networks?
Yeah, it's a good question because depending on the design of the intent network, like especially depending on if you're going cross-chain at least, if the user's funds get escrowed. One of the things about our design is that they don't get escrowed and instead the filler is bonded, which means the filler can actually take the user's capital and feed it into another intent network to kind of fill for them. And so, yeah, there's lots of different ways that it plays out. It's just like a weird situation when you're building an intent network and you've got a UI for your intent network, are you just kind of pushing everyone through your thing, or are you kind of trying to provide a useful UI? So I'm not fully sure, but I think there is something like a weird thing that we haven't kind of fully tapped into on our design that you know, our fillers can kind of send the user's funds over other bridges or intent networks. So that's the kind of one way.
Want to say something to it, Markus?
Yeah. I think you were asking about how do we think about the composing of the solutions, right? I think between these different intent networks like UniX and CowSwap and OneInfusion, the task decomposes into the same building blocks. So whether the task is to index or whether the task is to run an algorithm or to batch, these building blocks are interchangeable, and you can use them and compose them differently for different intent auctions. I think ultimately we are missing something between the user and the intent, where at the moment we have apps like UniX that are trying to capture both the creation of the intent and the user interface, and it's really awkward because then there is this exclusivity when they work with order flow partners like LiFi, or when they go to MetaMask, and then they're not composable. You have to either integrate CowSwap or UniX. You can't compare them. So I think there's a missing composability aspect there, where actually you should be able to, and you should be able to tap into the different solver networks and the different solution types without having to choose one over the other. I don't exactly know what the precise solution is, but there's definitely some clunkiness in the interface that could be more composable.
It's a perfect bridge to the very last topic, because we have 2 minutes left.
Perfect bridge to LiFi.
Maybe. No, like the perfect bridge to essentially talking about standardization. So there is a proposed cross-chain standard by Uniswap and Cross already, not really specified out yet. But the idea of standardization kind of chance like opportunity and threat at the same time to intent networks. That's something I would like to debate with you guys. Do you think standardization is going to happen, and what does it actually mean for intent networks? Where's the moat then in your networks if all the solvers operate? So then the moat again is just direct integrations, right? So yeah, feel free, whoever wants to chime in.
I'm super bullish on threats. Like, if any business feels threatened by something, it's a good sign. It means there is a more efficient way to be developed to do something that a business intended to do and capture some value in. Of course, if you do that too often, then you know, if you're not subtle and elegant about this, then you're hurting people unnecessarily. But if a team is being threatened by an open source development, then that's actually a very good sign. Yeah, that's just my point on that.
I think in the context of ERC 7683, I think it's an opportunity, because if everybody else implements it, then we will be cheaper because there's inefficiencies in the standard. Yeah, I mean, I think generally I'm a little bearish. Historically we operated an aggregator on the NFT side, and like it's annoying to aggregate, but it's also not that hard. And so like for a filler, solver, market maker, what you gain from it being a standard is like fairly minimal. And compared to the politics of convincing everyone to adopt, and then like there's kind of the needs are different. Like the more you pick a standard that tries to cover every possible way of doing things, the less useful it is, because it's effectively kind of lowest common denominator. So I think there are challenges. I think like probably the biggest argument in favor is just narrative, and kind of we're unifying Ethereum and everyone's on the same page, and like, you know, it's easy for people to understand, like to have a number that they can kind of tweet efficiently. But yeah, I think it'll kind of play out more messy, and in some ways mess is good. It's innovation. You know, people are doing different things, trying different ways, competing. So I'm kind of like more a fan of like, let there be mess and chaos, and then like simplify it, abstract it through aggregation and kind of tooling and orchestration.
I agree with that. Katia.
Yeah, I don't think there's any imminent threat of standardization. just because I think the barrier of entry in this market is very low. It's a very global industry. There are plenty of talented, energetic people all across the world, often working on the same thing without realizing that, but doing it in slightly different ways. I think we're kind of in a period of chaos, and maybe at some point there's got to be something big that would warrant standardization, or most likely it would be just that there would be, and there already are in certain areas, some very strong winners that basically everyone else just kind of wants to follow for convenience, rather than for the reasons that tech or that way to build something is actually technically superior.
And some last words?
Well, let's try. I think a lot of the ERC standards are just purely marketing nowadays. I don't know if anyone collaborated on the cross-chain standard. We didn't. If anyone did, okay. Nobody did? Nice. Maybe that says enough. So kind of our view at Enso is we need people to use our infrastructure really easily, and since we're aggregating many different DeFi protocols that all have different function signatures, all different parameters and so forth, we can't expect our consumers to understand each individual protocol, so we had to create standards around these, not forcing these protocols to conform to our standards, but we create a standard that can then conform to all of them, right? This allows us to allow the market to be free, create what they want, have no boundaries, and then we kind of have that hard work of being able to wrap it into something that's usable. I think that is actually better long term, but happy if we want to create another ERC over 9,000 and just keep going on this and create standards of standards of standards. But we don't really see much value in it. For now, we just create our own and then wrap things underneath that makes it easier.
I would argue that it's kind of your mode. Would you still consider to open source these standards, these abstractions for the...
So we didn't know Taiko was going to be released. And then we saw it and we're like...
It's released.
I know it's released. So we planned on releasing it for a long time, right? We have over 100 plus DeFi integrations inside of this. Now, we have many projects that have actually forked our contracts, right? Some that maybe are bigger names that didn't mention this either, maybe some other ones as well. But the standards is real where the moat is and the contracts, but then also the off-chain algos and combining all of this together. I think if somebody wants to combine all this together, if we open source it, it's going to take them a really long time. Now, the way we view this is not similar to Taiko, which is people fork this and run them themselves. We open source it for us approaching to a DeFi protocol that a customer asked and say to them, hey, add it yourself. That means we can kind of offset the work in a way and open this as a network for all the abstractions that can happen. The bottleneck right now is we have all these integrations that people have asked us for, but we only have limited resources, right? But if we open this up and contact 100 other DeFi protocols, then this can turn into a real flywheel effect.
Amazing. Guys, thank you so much for being on this panel. It was great. And any room for questions? No room for questions. Sorry. All right.
Thank you.